Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to the City of London Corporation's National Hate Crime Awareness Week webinar. My name is Doug Barrow. I'm an elected member of the corporation and here today as chairman of our Safer City Partnership. I wish I could say what a delight it is to see so many of you here, but whilst I can't see you, it's still a real pleasure to welcome you all virtually. Today we will be hearing from our panel of 4 speakers. This will be followed by a short panel discussion, concluding with a Q&A session. Should you have any questions for the speakers, please put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. Only our panelists will see the questions. If you have any technical issues, please use the chat function. We're here today to promote a strong and united approach to tackling hate crime in the city. Hate crimes can be classified as any crime that is targeted at a person because of hostility or prejudice towards that person's disability, race or ethnicity, religion or belief, sexual orientation, or transgender identity. A hate crime can be committed against a person or property. A person can also be targeted by association or because of the perception of a characteristic, even if that is not, in fact, the case. Not all hate incidents amount to criminal offences, but it is important that they are reported and recorded by the police. Sadly, most hate crimes still go unreported. Some of you may have seen the recent BBC articles by Ben Hunt that focused on hate crimes. I was deeply concerned to realise that there had been an increase in homophobic hate crimes from just over 6,500 reported cases to 18,500 cases in the last 5 years. An increase in greater confidence by victims to report crimes will have contributed to this growth, but there is a view that these figures are just the tip of the iceberg and could be significantly higher. It also showed that this rise is not just in certain parts of the country, but the problem is nationwide and rising. The report also highlighted that there had been a 25% increase in transphobic hate crimes in the last year alone. You will have read on your invitation for today that this week aims to encourage local authorities, police and councils, key partners and communities affected by hate crime to work together to tackle local hate crime. Starting in 2009 to mark the 10th anniversary of the bomb attacks in Brixton, Lane and Soho, the week is organised by a small group of volunteers based in South London. We're delighted that Mark Healey, the co-founder and chair of Trustees, is one of our panellists today. Mark is passionate about tackling hate crime by empowering communities to work together with local authorities and other key partners. Our second panellist is Dr. Holly Powell-Jones, founder of Online Media Law UK. Holly educates internet users about digital communications, law, regulation and ethics. Thirdly, it's a pleasure to welcome Detective Chief Superintendent Maria Woodall, Head of Crime for City of London Police, where she manages the police teams who investigate hate crime, both in the physical and cyberspace. And finally, a welcome to Amil, Director of Remembering Srebrenica. Remembering Srebrenica seeks to commemorate the genocide at Srebrenica and learns from what happened there to oppose hatred and intolerance. So, without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome today Mark Healey. Mark, please.
Hello, everybody. So my name is Mark Healey, and I'm the founder of National Hate Crime Awareness Week. I've been a victim of hate crime. I was tortured and bullied at school, been dragged into an alleyway and kicked black and blue. I've seen my partner attacked in front of me and fought back. And I've also had a gang of 4 people who call me a baddie boy arrested. And thankfully, now 2 of them have criminal convictions and have served hours of community service. I also used to drink at the Admiral Duncan in Soho before it was blown up. On the 10th anniversary of the Admiral Duncan, I read an article that said that the communities don't care. The anniversaries cause pain and suffering, and therefore we should play these anniversaries down, and that struck me as wrong. And so I decided to set up a Facebook group called 172430. The numbers, the dates of the 3 attacks on Brixton, Lane and Soho. And it was just going to be a small group marking the anniversaries each year, which we now call the April Action Remembrance. However, in the same year, there were two attacks on gay men. James Parks in Liverpool, thankfully he survived the attack, and Ian Bainham, who was left in a coma for 4 weeks and then died in October. The attacks have inspired a number of vigils to take place around the UK, and we helped coordinate those vigils through our group. We organised the London Vigil Against Hate Crime, and we did that between 2009 to 2012. In 2012, the vigils evolved into what we now know as National Hate Crime Awareness Week. We started with 79 councils, and that's risen to over 300 councils taking part in all four corners of the country. Each year, we promote a message of hope. H for hate crime awareness, O for operational responses. It's a police term, but what we really mean is, if it happened to you or a member of your family, what would you do about it? How would you support them? Who would you report to? Preventing hate crime, when we know it's happening, how can we stop it happening? And E, empowering communities, making sure that everybody from the top of the tree with the politicians to the bottom with all the communities are involved in tackling hate crime in all its forms. We usually hold a service at St. Paul's Cathedral where we light a national candle of hope and remembrance for those affected by hate crime. And this year, the candle has been lit by Cheryl and Tam in memory of 18 disabled people who were featured in the first Getting Away with Murder report, which was one of the first reports about disability hate crime in the UK. As I said, I've been a victim of hate crime. I've survived it. I'd like to think that I've moved on to help other people as well. And I hope that National Hate Crime Awareness Week inspires everybody to get involved and to look out for each other. Thank you. I'll now pass over to Holly.
Thank you very much. And my name is Holly Powell-Jones. As has already been said, I design and deliver education on social media, law and ethics. I also used to be a volunteer for victim support, and I also ran a Police and Crime Commissioner funded project educating around 10,000 young people aged between 10 and 18 about kind of law, crime, policing and offending on social media and in the digital age. And I really want to talk about my PhD research today, which focused on young people's perceptions of what was or wasn't a crime to post online, and in particular about perceptions of hate speech and hate crime online as well, because I think public perceptions of the law are extremely important. We know with hate crime, for example, that victims are very severely affected. You know, they can suffer with anxiety and distress, but we also know that reporting rates are still quite low. And I do think some of that is to do with perceptions of the law. So what I do in my workshops is I show young people examples of what might constitute hate speech online and get them to respond to it. Now, the good news is that a lot of young people are very good at recognizing prejudice and discrimination. So they will point at content and say, you know, that's racist, that's homophobic, or, you know, that's terrible. But they're not always clear on whether it is a crime or not. And my research has shed some light on why that might be. So some of the key things are, first of all, misunderstandings about freedom of expression and free speech online. There's a really great guide to free speech, hate speech and the law by Index on Censorship, which I would encourage people to have a look at. Secondly, if no individuals have been targeted directly, that can lead to confusion about whether it's a crime. So comments that are about a group of people, even if they are dehumanizing, if they're not directly targeting individuals, that can lead to confusion about whether it constitutes a crime. There's also a lot of denial of harm and denial of the victim. You know, this idea that it's just words, or if it's online, you know, it's not a real crime or it's not causing real harm. And finally, there's also a bit of an issue with the widespread visibility and tolerance of this kind of speech online as well. A lot of young people said to me, well, we see stuff like this being said, being posted all the time. How can it possibly be illegal? So we have to be really wary there that actually we can be contributing to a perception that it's not against the law by the fact that nothing happens as a result of this kind of behaviour. And also being very, very clear that publishers and distributors of content do have legal responsibilities for the content that they are sharing, because that can be a little bit confused as well. And also, of course, we we've got different groups that are covered by these protections. The Law Commission is undertaking a review at the moment to see whether those categories should be widened to include some different groups. So I think it's important to kind of keep an eye on that as well. So solutions, I would say absolutely we need more clarity on the law, and absolutely education and awareness on it, but also kind of enforcement and action taken against behaviour, and consistency in terms of how the law is applied to people, including online. We know as well that victims may themselves not recognise it unless we do better on these things. So, and we don't want to leave victims to manage on their own. I think it's something that we all have a shared kind of responsibility to educate ourselves on what is and isn't acceptable and legal behaviour, including online. So that's it from me. I'm going to hand over now to Detective Chief Superintendent Maria Woodall, who's Head of Crime at the City of London Police.
Oh, thanks very much, Holly, and thanks everybody for inviting me here today. I've been a police officer now for 31 years, and when I joined way back in the late 80s, I was in the minority as a woman in the police service. However, I'm pleased to say that over the 31 years of my service, there have been huge changes in policing, both on a cultural and sort of physical area. So you're seeing a lot more women, and the police service is actually going out quite firmly now to try and recruit from all different angles of society, because police officers are part of society. So today I wanted to talk to you about hate crime, because it's a really important area for us, and I'm really pleased that the focus is on it this week, because through COVID we did actually see a drop-off in a lot of areas of crime because people weren't out and about. But what we have seen this year, sadly, is a 3% rise in hate crime. So the focus this week is really, really timely. So on that 3% rise, we're sort of breaking it down now on a sort of a 4-week rolling check, because we can't really compare this year's figures to last year's figures because of the COVID interval we had. So we're doing it every 4 weeks. And when we look down at some of the groups, we're seeing an 8% rise in faith hate crime. We're seeing a 5% rise in sexual orientation hate crime, race 2%, and also disability 1%, with an overall rise nationally of 3% at the moment. So it's really difficult to compare, but really important that people sort of look at that rise and try and understand where it's coming from and why. So from an individual perspective, it's really important that you continue to report hate crime. For a couple of reasons really, but as an individual, when you report to the police, you will receive support from us. Holly did quite a bit just now on perception. Sometimes it's really difficult to know when something is or isn't a hate crime, and hate is a really, really strong word. So if you report to the police, you'll get guidance, you'll get support, and also it gives you your voice. You get a chance to explain what happened to you, and you will know what's right and wrong and how you were treated. So it gives you that voice. It gives you an element of control as to what happens next. Would you want to go forward with a prosecution? Would you want to report for information only? Or were you that third person in a group that saw something happening to somebody, and even though they didn't think there was anything wrong with it, you knew that it was wrong? That person that may have been in receipt of that sort of hate crime action may be desensitized, because it may have been years and years that they've been treated that way. So it's really important that you report to police and come forward and say your piece, and then you have some control how it's going to be dealt with moving forward. So you would then contribute to prevention. So we will look at all the reports that come in. Some of them will be taken forward to prosecution, some sadly won't, because we have a limit on resources. But you will contribute to that big picture, and you will have some control in how that is taken forward for you. You'll help with the education. You'll help us come up with diversion and ideas of talking to partners in how we can address some of the issues that we're seeing. Within the city, we have teams that go out and meet the community regularly to find out what their issues are and listen to them, to get their ideas on how best to tackle those issues that are coming up. Internally, we have an independent advisory scrutiny group of 20 people from the community that have a look at all our processes. They look at our stop and search, why our officers are stopping people. So we have numerous checks. So they will come along to some of our training. They will look at how our police officers members are trained. And as I say, they will also check on after what we've done, how we did it. So we're constantly getting feedback, trying to learn and grow as an organisation. So from a preventative perspective, really important that you report, but also you will contribute to the national picture. So we need to get all that information together so that we can address the problem, we can keep those figures accurate, and we can place pressure on government to get more resources and more help and support where it's required. So it's really important that you report, and please don't be afraid to report, because we're human in the police service. We're here to listen to you and we're here to help you. So please report and we'll support you and guide you through. So that's enough from me. I'll now hand over to Amil. Thank you.
Thanks, Maria. My name's Amil. I'm the director of Remembering Srebrenica. Remembering Srebrenica is a charitable organisation that's funded by the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government, and we're the only organisation based in the UK that raises awareness of the Srebrenica genocide, which was committed in Bosnia 25 years ago. Our aims are, in essence, threefold. So first, we remember the genocide which took place by organising commemoration activities across town halls, places of worship, schools, to name but a few examples. And in the last 7 years, we've educated close to 8,000 memorial events and activities. Secondly, we educate young people about the lessons from Srebrenica, and today we've educated nearly 150,000 young people right across the country. And the third thing we do is we create community champions who go out to Bosnia for 4 days. They learn more about what happened in Srebrenica, and they come back pledging to use the lessons to tackle hatred and intolerance in their own communities. For those of you who aren't aware of what happened, is that actually after the Holocaust, the world said never again, yet just 25 years ago, we had genocide taking place at the heart of Europe. Bosnia is a place which isn't very far from here. For those of you who've gone on holiday, many of us have gone to Turkey, many of us have gone to Greece, you'd fly over Bosnia. And Bosnia was also one of the most integrated societies that you could find. So prior to the breakup of Yugoslavia, it was a place where communities who were from different ethnic backgrounds lived side by side, and it would be very hard to distinguish between who was, for example, Croat, who was Serb, who was a Bosnian Muslim. In the space of just under 2 weeks, you had over 8,000 Bosnian Muslim men and boys who were systematically murdered by Bosnian Serb forces, and they were buried in mass graves. Quite often, they were reburied in secondary graves, and to this day, the remains of those who were killed still are missing. There are survivors we work with, for example, who all they've had to bury, for example, from their son is just one little bone. And for many others, there are issues around sort of closure because they have yet not identified where their loved ones are buried. The third thing is you may question, why is it relevant to what happens here? And what we do use is the lessons from Srebrenica to say, actually, genocide doesn't happen overnight. It's the culmination rather of a series of steps that starts with words. And those words develop into animosity develops into fear. And if we allow that sort of hatred and those emotions to flourish unchecked, Srebrenica is the culmination of actually the worst excesses of hatred that can be allowed to happen if we don't actually do something and we're not proactive to challenge that. So what we try and do is, through our commemoration events, for example, we bring communities together. We get them to critically think about some of the things around what happened in Bosnia and encourage them to use those lessons to actually think about what they can do to modify their own behaviour. And one of the things we've seen, which has been remarkably successful, is actually people from different backgrounds have come together to commemorate. And at the same time, they've gone away reporting that actually they recognise the importance of doing more to challenge low-level hate crime and prejudice and intolerance. They recognise that actually we all do have a moral obligation and responsibility to do whatever we can to make sure that actually hatred doesn't flourish to the extent that actually, if you look at the hate crimes that are happening, we can do something to prevent it. The final thing that we do very successfully is actually use the stories to try and inspire people and to try and educate them. And we think actually by inspiring people and educating them and using the lessons of the Bosnian genocide, that they're more receptive to the idea of recognizing where hate crime can lead to, because quite often people feel that if it doesn't directly affect them, that they feel they don't actually they don't have to do anything about it. And actually when they see what happened in Bosnia, they feel more motivated to actually go back to their communities and do something to strengthen their own areas, so we can ensure that we're all living in a society that's more cohesive and safer. Thank you, and I'm going to hand back to Doug.
thanks to all of the speakers, to Mark, Holly, Maria, and Amil. There's been some very personal stories demonstrating how real is the problem. And what has struck me from our speakers is that we can do more to learn from lessons of the past, more to help prevent these crimes, and more to ensure that they're reported. And that's the responsibility of all of us to stand up and be counted, not just to leave it to the victims. If any of us is aware of potential hate crimes and there's any doubt, then don't be afraid or shy. Please report it. That's so important. So I'd now like to welcome back our 4 panelists to the screen for our panel session, where we'll be discussing how we can work together to stop hate crime. Are we all back on board now? I think we are. Good. I wonder if I could ask each of you in turn to give a short response to the question around hate crime and communities and how we can work together to stop the crimes. Do you think there's been any positive development in the last couple of years? Mark, do you see any positive changes there?
Absolutely. So we've gone from 79 councils to over 300 councils taking part. That's over 75% of councils around the UK. So our campaign is growing, and I think that's considerable support, but there's still 25% to go. So I'd say to those councillors out there, if you're not involved, get involved now. Now's the time.
Thank you. What about you, Holly?
Well, I work with young people, and I find that's always very optimistic and inspiring to work with younger generations, because I do think, no child is born hating other people, and actually young people can be quite good at recognising and challenging prejudice and discrimination. So I think we need to encourage more of that. And I think, we look at online and social media and often just focus on the negatives, how toxic it is, but it can be a wonderful resource as well to build communities, build connections, build empathy. So I think that's important to remember too.
Thank you. Maria, from your side.
Yeah, I think the police are very good at having a look at themselves and trying to learn from their mistakes. I mean, in history, we've seen time and time again where we have made mistakes, but we're a very learning and open organisation. We have a system where if somebody wants to make a complaint about something that's happened to them from another police officer, then we do investigate those complaints. And again, we take learning from every incident that we can. Also, there's a recognition in the police service now about unconscious bias, and our officers and staff all undergo now unconscious bias training, so that at least you can be aware of your own bias and actually reflect on them and try and ensure they don't interfere with your daily work in amongst our communities.
Thank you, Maria. And Amil, have you sort of seen any positive developments since you've been starting the work you're doing?
Yes, I mean, I mentioned it in my remarks, but actually to just take one example is that people didn't know about Srebrenica when you mentioned it to them, let alone actually express a willingness to do something. And if you just take during my time, for example, the number of local authorities who were willing to do something, you could count on the fingers on one hand. This year we had over 150 local authorities actually commemorate Srebrenica. We've had a record number of police forces and constabularies do something. We're in education. We see schools are more willing to incorporate it into their PSHE lesson planning because they recognise the importance of not just, as you say, learning from the past, but it's more importantly, those lessons. How can you make it relevant to communities here in the UK and empower them with the skills and the knowledge so that they feel equipped to tackle the growing hatred and intolerance which we're seeing in our communities here?
Thank you. We've looked at some of the positive, but what about some of the negatives? I mean, cuts in resources. Maria, do you see that as a problem for the police?
Well, we've never had as many resources as we would like at any point in time, to be honest. So, we have to focus on where the problems are, which is why it's so important that people report, because we will go in on a yearly basis to decide where our priorities are. But if something comes up and we're seeing an escalation, then the reporting of the problem actually means that we will change our tack and we will redeploy our resources into different areas.
All right, thank you. What about you, Holly?
I'm going to say something a little controversial, but the one thing that young people say to me quite a lot when I'm educating them in this area is, well, how come this person gets away with it or that person gets away with it? We have a lot of leaders in politics, in the press, who are quite well established, and their power doesn't seem to be rocked or threatened at all by the fact that they do make discriminatory comments with impunity. So I actually think there's more we could be doing to kind of address perhaps some of that hypocrisy.
I think it's a fair point. What about you, Mark?
I actually agree with Holly. What we say counts and matters, and it has an impact on people's lives. So let's sort out the rhetoric and get it right. But also funding for hate crime organisations, I think it's too low at the moment. There's lots of people we know who need help and support, but we can't provide that if the organisations don't have that money available to be there for them. So up the funding, please.
Okay, and Amil?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, if you were to ask people's priorities in terms of like tackling hate crime, it quite often isn't the most salient issues. And the concern is obviously with the situation around COVID, is that it may become less of a priority because obviously in terms of funding, or where like political preferences lie, maybe towards other aspects of rebuilding. And quite often the concern is it may come at the expense of actually, you know, ensuring that work's not being done in this area, where if you actually look at what is happening in terms of some of the issues which may arise and the challenges for community cohesion, there is the case to be made that actually COVID may exacerbate some of those tensions that you're seeing. And if anything, it needs to have actually greater attention and more priority.
I mean, you know, and generally, you know, are we seeing, I mean, you brought up the effects of the pandemic on hate crime. Are you seeing that market? Is it creating more of a problem?
So what we're hearing is actually more people are experiencing crime in and around their homes as they're getting, you know, sort of neighbourhood disputes have escalated during this time. So there needs to be some more resource there.
Okay, I'm going to come to Maria at the end of this, but Holly, did you want to say anything on that one?
Yeah, I would say that obviously the pandemic means that most of our lives have moved increasingly online, you know, socializing, education, work, and that comes with obviously an increased risk and exposure to things like online abuse, online hate, threats, etc. So yeah, it has definitely shifted the dynamic, and it is just as important to tackle it online as it is in the offline space too.
And Maria, from the policing side, what are you seeing with the effect of the pandemic on hate crime?
Well, yeah, I mean, there is a rise in anxiety. I mean, the police, some of my staff have been targeted because of us trying to educate and make people aware of COVID restrictions. So there is less tolerance in areas, and we are seeing a rise in domestic violence because people have been together at home for such a, you know, for a longer time. And again, that can have some impact around our hate crime statistics as well. So yeah, we are seeing it rising. As I said, there's a 3% rise this year, whereas other crimes have fallen slightly during COVID. So we are seeing more anxiety, less intolerance, and people being targeted, sadly.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, we're nearly coming to the end of our panel session. So one final point, if we can have a bit briefly, any examples of bringing people together to particularly inspiring? And Amil, do you have any examples of that? I mean, you've got a lot of experience in that area.
Yeah, I mean, so I mentioned our commemorations earlier, and I mean, one particular example which struck out is that actually we took out a delegation of imams and rabbis, so from the Muslim and Jewish community. And actually, when they came together, they realized that in terms of when it came to commemorations, they shared so much more in common. And then for the very first time, they held an interfaith event, which provided people from like their community to actually, like for the first time, someone had never visited a synagogue. And it was just actually the commemoration brought people together. And actually, when you talk about the lessons, because they had experienced Islamophobia, the rabbis had experienced anti-Semitism, it was a very positive moment because we recognize actually when it comes to hate crimes, there are no boundaries. There are, in that sense, we can all be the victims of that. And moving forward, the only solution for us is actually to work together with people from different backgrounds if we're to effectively tackle it.
Thank you. And Holly, have you seen any particular people that are inspiring in this area?
I think there's loads of really inspiring people in this area, but I think actually one of the things that I really like about kind of social media movements that we've had to tackle discrimination and prejudice has been actually the inclusion and the visibility of more marginalised voices who perhaps don't normally get the kind of the coverage and the say. So, you know, Black Lives Matter, we've had Me Too, we've had various other movements where more marginalised groups have still been able to share their experience. That's encouraged empathy, and it's been a really good opportunity to educate and learn about each other's experiences.
Sure, thank you. And Maria, have you seen any of this? Anyone, you know, from policing across, not only in London but across Britain?
I mean, I was thinking more about our cadet programme. I mean, the City of London Police are one of the only police forces that still have a cadet programme. So we have young people coming in from a real mix of cultures at the moment, which I'm really proud of. You know, and we listen to those young people. We listen to their side of and how they feel about policing, and they have some great ideas. So I'd like to see more cadet schemes in more police forces to start to get youth back in. And I think youth are going to be very, very badly impacted on by COVID from a cultural and obviously economic perspective as well. So I'm really proud of our cadets.
I too am proud of our cadets, are great people. But Mark, have you got any particular individuals that have been inspiring in your
Not individuals, because there's so many people that we work with, but what I found the We Stand Together campaign really strong and effective. It was adopted by all the police services, and a lot of faith and community organisations across the whole of the country. So I think that's been a very strong campaign. I applaud the work of Tower Hamlets No Place for Hate Forum and the work they're doing there. It really is outstanding work. That's
great, thank you. We've got one or two questions coming in. I've got one for you, Maria. How do I report hate crime?
There's loads of different ways to report nowadays. We have the traditional way where you can actually phone 101 and call it in that way. Obviously 999 if it's an emergency and there's a lot of threat at that time. You can now report online. So we have gone digital in most police, I think virtually all police forces now you can report online digitally. And it's not just about crime, it's about information as well that you can do that way. But if you do phone us, we can divert you into our public protection unit where we have a vulnerable victims advocate. And that lady can talk through what's happened to you, give you support, and actually understand what level of hate crime you've had to endure immediately and probably over the years. So there's lots of different ways to report in, which I would encourage.
Thank you. I mean, Holly, following on from that, I mean, many social media platforms seem to incite hate, and how can this be policed or controlled?
Yeah, well, I have quite strong views on this actually, because what I don't want to see is sort of policing outsourced to people who aren't the police actually, because I don't like the idea of platforms themselves or an abstract regulator suddenly being in charge of managing victims of crime online actually. So I think it's more about how we can put pressure on those global platforms to actually work with the police to give them the access and the resources that they need and to support investigations to enable justice for victims.
Thank you on that. Had one in from John Schonfeld. Does the panel think that positive discrimination is leading to more reporting of hate crime? Maria, possibly first come to you on that.
I must admit, I haven't seen it.
Okay.
And positive discrimination, there is a place for it in certain areas.
Holly, you had a smile there.
Yes, I have a smirk on because I used to be a journalist and work in the media, and I actually think it's the framing of these discussions and the media and public discourse around things like quotas, positive discrimination, etc. that is a bit of a problem, because we do often see a very adversarial setup where it's somebody who's pro positive discrimination and somebody who doesn't like it on the other side, and I think that can sort of antagonize. I heard somebody the other day say a really great phrase, which is we need less heat on this issue and more light, and I just think that's a really good way of phrasing it.
That's good. Mark, did you want to add to that?
Nothing to add to that, I'm afraid.
Another question we've got in is that how can I support someone if I know who has experienced hate crime? Are there existing support services, organisations that can help? Who would like to take that one? And there we have.
So I'm quite happy to. So on our national website, we've got a page dedicated to all the hate crime reporting organisations across the UK, with a Google map with markers for every council who provides a hate crime reporting service, for police services, for local groups and organisations, and we're adding markers onto that map all the time. So that's available on the national website.
Okay. Anyone else got comments on that one? No.
Yeah, I have.
Yep.
I mean, obviously, the police does have two sides to it, and we are a supportive organisation. We still use victim support, and as I say, we've got our victims and vulnerable victims advocate, who again can support you through the process and point you to other agencies that can give you support outside of the police.
Thank you. And I've got one for you, Amil. How can I support someone I know who has experienced hate crime?
Yeah, so I mean, there's sort of two strands to this question. The first is obviously in terms of direct support to the victim, and that very much is dependent upon that individual and sort of what they're experiencing. So it's always, there always should be sort of, the advice should be tailored in terms of the support you're being able to offer to them. Is the wider thing, and going back to my remarks, is actually what you can do is to, and what many victims of hate crime actually feel empowered by, is when they feel that other people care about what it is that actually they have been the victims of. And what inspires them is when people actually support those causes by whatever it may be doing, tackling something to actually do more and being proactive. So if you just take a brief example, last night I was at an award ceremony, and there's so many people who were upstanders, who were celebrating those upstanders who, through voluntary work, to actually working with organizations that do work to tackle hate crime, to themselves speaking about the impact it can have on people they know, from speaking in schools, for example, that can be go an enormous way to actually sort of supporting victims in the sense to ensure that actually moving forward, we can do something to intervene and prevent such things from happening again.
Okay, thank you. Did you want to add to that, Holly? I see you nodding enthusiastically.
No, I was having flashbacks to my victim support training when I was just a teenager, but it's all coming flooding back to me, and I absolutely I thought it was fantastic, and it was a wonderful way to learn a lot about the kind of support victims need. But I think Amil said it perfectly, actually, which is the most important thing is to tailor it to the person, to the individual, because people are different. We don't all want the same things,
And yeah, thank you. And Mark, I mean, I know you've experienced hate crime yourself. Could you give some response to that?
Well, the important thing is to listen to what the person is saying and to believe them. Because a lot of the time when people are trying to report hate crime, they're not sure or confident that other people will actually believe them in the first place. So actually just listening and providing that place for them to air what's happened is the first thing to do. And then sit down and work out with them what they want to do next. So do they actually want something to happen, or are they happy just to offload what's happened and that's it? Some people obviously do want to take it to the courts and see convictions, but that's not the same for everybody.
And I think, Maria, you would agree that I hope that the City of London Police are listening in cases like this and can help the victims.
Yeah, absolutely. What we need people to do is report to us, and we can support them in many different ways. As Mark has just said, not everybody wants the same thing, and not one size fits all. So there are a range of options. Obviously, if there has been serious abuse, then we will encourage people potentially to take the criminal route, because sadly that's the best way to go with some cases. But the victim will discuss it. We'll discuss it with them. We'll have a conversation. We will listen to their views, and then we will put forward options for moving forward.
Thank you. And finally, as we're coming to the end of the question session, is one for Mark. Is what are the next steps for the charity National Hate Crime Awareness Week? Where's it going forward?
So our focus is three things really: the April Action Remembrance, marking the anniversaries of the 3 nail bomb attacks on Brixton, Lane and Soho. That happens every year on the 17th, 24th and 30th of April. Organising National Hate Crime Awareness Week next year is going to be the 10th anniversary since we started, so it's going to be a big year. We're going to use this campaign slogan, Safe Place for All, because the messages we've used in the last 2 years were no place to hate and we stand together. The Safe Place for All is our end game, where we want to be. So after we've dealt with all the hate crime, I actually want people to live in peace and harmony together. And that's the goal we're working towards. So it will be Safe Place for All as the main slogan. We need funding. So, I mean, we get a good fund from the Mayor of London, but we need money to actually reach across the whole of the country. Let's get 100% of councils on board. Let's make sure every council website has a page dedicated to giving information about hate crime and how to report it, how to get help and support. At the moment, we know that not every council has that information available on their websites. And to me, frankly, that's not acceptable. It doesn't cost anything, or it's really sort of peanuts to put that information on display.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Mark. And I'm pleased to say that the motto of my own ward of Aldgate is open to all, and that's actually taking on more impact as we go on. But my thanks to all of the speakers for their answers to the question. And it now gives me great pleasure to welcome Mr. Port Double, our city remembrancer, but who is here today as our multi-faith network sponsor to make some closing remarks. Paul.
Thanks very much, Doug. And as you said in opening, and was referred to by Amil and Maria in the figures, sadly, religion can form a feature of hate crime. We surely all must remember always that so much more brings us together and we have in common than divides us. And what Amil said in that reference to the event is such a demonstration of that, it seems to me. So many thanks again to Mark, Holly, Maria and Amil for their contributions to this really important webinar. We really do need to keep up our efforts to identify and tackle this crime, which of course does have, as we've been seeing and discussing, many forms. So may I please encourage all of those of you watching this webinar or who will watch it to discuss it with your colleagues, your work colleagues and your friends and in your local communities so that we really do get on top of this crime. Thanks very much. And with that, back to you, Doug.
Paul, thank you very much for that. And it just leaves it to me to thank the City of London for hosting this webinar, to Paul and his team and others in the corporation for all their efforts in drawing this together, which has been really effective. A special thanks to the panelists for their significant contributions this afternoon. It's certainly opened my eyes to some of the issues and increased that. But especially to you, the audience, for your engagement and your interest. And so in conclusion, I really hope that you have now an improved understanding of what hate crime is, how to report it, and what actions you can take to prevent hate crime in the city. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching and your engagement.